I'd like to begin by welcoming all of you and thank you for making time on a Saturday evening for us. Before we start, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First is Hemant Divate. Hemant is a reputed Marathi poet and editor, translator and publisher based in Mumbai. His critically acclaimed poetry quarterly magazine, Abhida, later Abhida Nantar, has been published since 1992. His collection of Marathi poetry, Virus Alert, was translated by noted poet Dilip Chitre. He has won several prestigious awards, including the Bharatiya Bhasha Parishad Award. Together with his wife Smriti Divate, he's founded Paperwall Media, an imprint of which Poetry-Wala publishes English language poetry translation in India, one of the few publishers that regularly bring out vast quantities of English language poetry. Guys, give Hemant a really big hand. Our next panelist is Tejaswini Apte Ram. Tejaswini resides in London. Currently, she's in Bombay promoting her new book, These Circuses. It's been published by Aleph Publishing. And guys, give Tejaswini a really big hand. Thanks. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Arun Kale. He's the editor of Helter Skelter magazine. Arun has been publishing magazines for many years, and Helter Skelter itself has run for 7 years straight. I'm the assistant editor of Helter Skelter magazine. Guys, please give Arun a really big hand. I'd like to start with Hemant. Hemant, as we've had this conversation before previously, when you were thinking about Abhida Nantar and thinking about starting it, what prompted you to start Abhida Nantar at that time in India?
Actually, to tell you frankly and so on, nobody was actually accepting our poetry in Marathi. So we had to start our own magazine. And it's actually, this is the, what you call, true story. But I must tell you that before starting Abhida, the magazines like Anushtu and other little magazines in Marathi, they were publishing the cliche kind of poetry. You know, the poetry which was like in Pada Pulak or some meters. And we actually were writing in free verse like our predecessors like Arun Maratkar, Dilip Chitre and Namdar Isa. Different, I mean, it was like we were not writing the same kind of poetry, but we used to use a lot of English words in our poetry. Like we are all multi-religion people. So we started actually using English in our poetry. So Marathi magazines were saying that this is, why don't you write poetry in English then? So I said, or we said rather, that this is the language of ours. We actually, this is the only language we can speak in. We don't have command over English, not even your Marathi, not even Hindi. Our language was like a mixture of all the languages. So that's how we were like, we were being neglected. They thought that we are writing, say, anti-poetry or something. So that's how we started. I mean, then poets like Manya Joshi, Sachin Ketkar, and Salil Wagh, and a lot of others, they were also writing Marathi mixed English poetry, English mixed Marathi poetry, or Hindi mixed Marathi poetry. And it was different because it was like starting of globalization and our themes were different. We used to use a lot of words which actually the new technology gave us. I mean, say computer and then the pagers and the languages and slang, the new slang. So that's how actually we started. And we started publishing not only poetry, but we started publishing criticism. And to tell you now, after publishing, say for 15 years, we changed the way poetry was written and read by Marathi readers. So that's actually a good story in like 3-4 minutes.
Actually, it's very interesting that you brought up that later because I want you to talk about what prompted you to then move into starting the Poetry Wala imprint from Abhidanandar. Was there, I know that Abhidanandar was a Marathi and a regional language mainly, but what prompted you to start Poetry Wala, which now publishes quite a significant volume of English language translated and English language poetry?
Basically, in 2003, we started translating one or two poems for the little magazine which Antara they used to publish. We had asked, we wanted some Marathi poets and new generation poets to get published in her magazine. So then she asked me to Dilip said, I will send you some poems of new poet who is my friend. So I think he translated when here too he gets screwed, that is the poem. So he translated that poem and during say 1.5 months he completely finished the translation of my first book of poems. And actually the name, Marathi name was Kautishi Padantasha Kavita. And he translated as and renamed or named it rather the Virus Alert. So when he translated everything, then he told me that I have translated now the book, but I don't know who will publish it. So by the time actually I had already started publishing Marathi poetry through our imprint Abhida Lankar in Marathi. I published around 10 books of new poets. They were also even my second edition of my book, the first edition was published by somebody else, but second edition I published because I thought that the publishers are not doing the good service. I mean, they are not publishing the books properly. They keep a lot of things and your commas and separation and everything was like bad. And actually I bought the copies from the previous publisher and published my own book. So that was the case. But in case of Poetry Wala, when I had to publish this book, then Dilip Chitra actually designed the Poetry Wala logo. We decided that we'll come out with imprint, and he said, okay, you publish your book, maybe later on you can publish other poets also. So we started with my own book, Poetry Wala, and later on I realized that English poets, they are not interested in Marathi poets, Malayalam poets of that time. So I have to publish English poets also. And actually I was simultaneously writing two languages actually, Marathi and English poet. I studied fiction before and now I don't get time and I don't get the right kind of bad fiction to read. So I am with poetry. So that's how we started and we are here.
So actually I'd like to shift the conversation to Arun. Arun, as Hemant mentioned that like you saw a sort of gap in the market where new writers were not getting a chance to sort of bring out their work and so they had to resort to self-publishing. Helter Skelter actually started as an online magazine. So can you tell us a little bit about that and why did you decide to publish an online magazine first and then come out with print, whereas it's usually the other way around?
So I started Helter Skelter in the June of 2010. And I used to run another online magazine before that as well for 6 years. But I've always sort of had in mind that, I mean, even at that time, people were talking about like print is going to die soon, everything is going to be online. But I always had in mind that I don't think that's going to be the case. I always thought it's going to be like a hybrid publishing sort of thing, like where the best part of being online and the best part of being in print should sort of come together and work in both the writers and the publisher's favor. So I started Helter Skelter in 2010. In 2012, in those 2 years, we received a lot of emails asking us to publish short fiction poetry. That's something also that I was considering for a while, but I didn't know when was the right time to do it. And in early 2012, I just figured like, there's no point thinking about it, let's just do it and see how it does. So we put out a visual cue and we asked people to send in stuff. We picked the best entries. I got artwork commissioned for each piece. And since then, I've always made it a point to not. So the artist who makes the artwork and the writer never sort of communicate directly with each other. So they are always connected only through that story, which is something I wanted to maintain since then. So the first collection of short stories and poetries were also published online. We did 2 more online, and each one did much better than the rest, much better than the last one in terms of both readership and in terms of the quality and quantity of writing being submitted. And after that, we were encouraged enough to finally move into print. So the 4th one was the first in print, and we sold out. And then we did a much larger run with the 5th one, and the 6th one should be out soon. So
That's great. Tejaswini, I would like you to sort of give us a little history about how you sort of thought of the collection of stories that went into these circuses that sweep through the landscape, and the history of how you came about writing some of them, because I know there are some interesting stories behind each sort of story that makes up this collection of short stories. So can you give us some background on that?
Yes, so the collection is called These Circuses That Sweep Through the Landscape, and it was published a couple of months ago by Aleph Book Company. I didn't start off by thinking I was going to write a collection. If I had done that, I would have been too overwhelmed. I would have probably stopped right away. So I kept writing my stories without that agenda necessarily in mind of having a collection. And by the time I'd written 8, 9, 10, I thought this is pretty good. It could actually be a collection. I hadn't thought of it that way before. I had tried to submit some of the stories to various magazines and so on. That hadn't really worked. Which is actually, I've been told, that's the traditional route of getting noticed as a short story writer. You try to place your stories in various literary journals and magazines and so on. Strangely enough, that's not the route that worked for me. I placed one story, which is in this collection. I placed it in Himal magazine, which is published in and after that, I didn't manage, but then straight away I got a publisher, which was it felt good because Aleph Book Company, of course, is a top-notch publisher. And yet it was strange because I was told that that's not the conventional route.
Were you often told, as many new writers are, that short stories don't tell? And I know you've also heard this, that poetry doesn't sell, and so it is a little bit strange to come out with new copies and editions of poetry and short stories. So, Tejaswini, let's start with you.
Yeah. So, after I had finished writing all the stories and I had started thinking about getting them published, that's when people started telling me, actually, short story collections don't sell. And of course, it was too late by then. I'd written the thing. I wouldn't have written it any differently anyway. I wanted to write short stories, but it was only at that stage that it dawned on me that, oh, this is going to be a bit difficult to sell. Yeah.
Were you told that this is not the way that, your debut work should be brought out?
Yes. I approached various publishers and agents. One of the bigger publishers in India, I had a very interesting response from them. They said, we absolutely love your stories, but we don't think we can sell them because short stories don't sell. It was encouraging to know that they had loved the stories and the stories had been appreciated. At the same time, it was discouraging because they said they don't sell. And in a separate incident, I had met an agent outside India who didn't even want to hear what the stories were about. She just said, come to me if it's a novel, otherwise I don't have time to hear what the stories are about. So when Aleph took me on, quite rapidly, within 2 weeks of sending them the manuscript, they had liked it and wanted to sign me on. It was great. I was very encouraged by that. Yeah.
And Hemant, what about you? Do you often get told why poetry? Why are you publishing only poetry? Is it?
Now knows that I'm not going to stop publishing poetry because it does not really money or something else. It's like a passion or beyond that now. It's going close to the madness maybe. So I'm happy with it. So if somebody tells me tomorrow, like, say, Trump tells me, please don't write poetry, so I'm not going to listen to him. You know, so that, I mean, that's the way it is actually. It's like part of my, what do you call it? I'm like this, so I'm notorious.
Arun, do you hear this often as well? Why are you publishing short stories?
Like Hemant said, we are like this only. That's actually the first question that I'm always asked, like, especially every time after an anthology comes out, why do you want to bring out a book in print? And I mean, I don't think that's that's a really like useless question. Why not bring out something in print? Most people who read a book, I think the whole, like, people who ask these questions don't really think about the experience of it. Basically, like, reading online is very different from reading a book. Like, online, when you're reading using maybe your browser, you probably have like 10, 15 tabs open. Maybe you have some stories open, but you won't really go through them. You won't take the time to sit and read them in front of a backlit screen. There's many things fighting for your attention. You may just scan through the poem or the story. It's easy in terms of sharing it in the form of a link, but I find that a lot of people don't read stuff before sharing it. They just want to share it so that, you know, they're curating their personality online by associating themselves with that piece of writing. But when you're reading a book, you're actually taking the effort to go to your bookshelf, take out the book, and sit somewhere and read it and nothing else. Maybe you'll have a drink with you or whatever, but that's all you're doing. And it's a very focused sort of exercise. It's a very tactile sort of medium. You're touching it, you're smelling it. There's physical indications of how much you've read, how much you've not read. You can make notes, all of that stuff. So, I mean, the experience of online and print, again, is completely different, and I don't see why one thing has to do with another. And there is, in my mind, like, people who love to read, which is what the market for these smaller magazines is, in my opinion. If the production is good, I think they will, and if it's not too expensive, I think they will make the effort to buy it and just keep it with them.
Tejaswini, you mentioned that, you know, your experience wasn't the typical route that a young writer takes. You were, like, you said that placing a story in a magazine is like sort of the accepted first step. But you often find that publishers will only publish short stories if they come in like a duo with a novel already in progress. Was that what you were asked to do as well? That, you know, we will bring out these short stories, but then the expectation is that as a writer, you progress to a novel. Like, the short stories are sort of the stepsisters of a novel.
As far as my publisher was concerned, Aleph, I'm not sure that it was conditional. I don't think they would have said, if you're not doing a novel, we don't want your short stories. But the way it turned out was that I was, in fact, working on a novel as well, which I told them about when they asked. And so they were very happy to have this sort of combo, first short stories and then a forthcoming novel. So I signed up for both with them. Yeah, so that was my experience with that. But in an interesting point you made about whether short stories are considered as a sort of a stepsister of the novel. I've encountered that quite often in talking to people. I've lost count of the number of times people have said, oh, you're writing short stories, so when are you going to write a novel? As if a short story is a stepping stone to the higher art form of writing a novel, and I couldn't disagree more. They're two separate genres. It's a bit like asking a playwright, so you're writing a play, when are you going to do a film script? It's two separate things. Yes, they have overlapping skills, but much of it is having two different skill sets.
Hemant, this is something that you face as well, where people ask you, like, why don't you bring out longer, larger novels, and why are you only focused on poetry specifically?
Actually, now if you look at the time people get, they can, I mean, time they get to read, and secondly, how much time they can spend on any book. So what I feel actually that publishers are trying to push this heavy novels, around 500 pages and something like that, because all over the world there are libraries who buy books from these bigger publishers, and publishers are not interested whether the books are being read or no. So they make a lot of light in marketing and sales, so I know that if the book is 500 pages plus, then the cost will be around 499 rupees. And when they print around 500 copies, the book actually, they are getting the book at 100 rupees. With hardcover does not much, cost actually 8 to 12 rupees the book. So when they publish 5,000 books of novel, and whether people read or more, around 3,500 books are already taken by the libraries and different trusts all over the world. I am talking about big size publishers. And so I'm not interested in actually cutting trees and sending all this crap thing, to the readers. So we rather at paper one, we try and give people something which will change their life. They read poetry, their life definitely will get something, some, what you call, that thinking in their life. Though the poetry collection is small, is not profit making, but we are we are not looking at profit to publish it. We are looking at changing the little space around us. I normally give the example, for myself. When I was going through depression, when I was going in a garden and I saw a little flower, a tree, a small, not tree, shrub, the flower. So why this flower is there? Why only for 6 hours or so? So what is the purpose of the flower's life? The flower's life's purpose, actually, I found out that the flower is trying to make something around it, beautiful. So we are all like flowers. We should try to make our surroundings good so that everything will be very good, positive, and then we don't have to face people like in the politics or people we hate. If there is more poetry, the world will be more beautiful. This is what I think. More reading, more good art. If tomorrow all these people start listening to, say, classical music or something again, then life will be very beautiful. So we are from that, maybe even Arun.
So, Arun, do you find that producing short stories as an independent publisher, essentially, and often do you get sort of inquiries as to why are you not producing longer form, larger form? Are you happy in producing the short format that you do right now?
That's something also that I've considered, like publishing. Like Hemant was speaking to me about this yesterday. In a few years, you should maybe consider bringing out maybe full-length novels or full-length collections of poetry by one particular author, maybe. But I thought this is a good place to start. Also, this gives a chance to. It's called the Anthology of New Writing, so. To give people newer writers a sort of voice and a platform, I thought short stories work as a good sort of entry point to that.
Do you find that giving new writers a deadline to write to, or a subject or a theme to write to, comes with its own rewards and disadvantages?
Yeah, so we consciously made an effort either to have a visual cue or a theme. Also, one of the bigger reasons for that is to ensure that the stories are fairly exclusive to the magazine, they aren't submitting the same story to 10 different magazines. We wanted them to write something just for us. So, some writers will obviously try to shoehorn a story they've already written into the theme, even when it doesn't really fit. A lot of people who submit stuff don't even read the theme. I don't know how that works, but yeah, they just send in stuff. So, Uh, I mean, it's worked well so far. Like the idea of a theme, I really like the idea of a theme and building a book around it. Like there's a central sort of motif to the whole thing, instead of just randomly just inviting entries and putting them out together.
So, Tejaswini, I know that you've also sort of had stories that were worked on like you took your time working on certain stories, but then other stories I know were written to sort of a deadline or to a sort of prompt. Would you like to share your experiences with that?
Yes, so after I was signed on by Aleph Book Company for publishing this book, the Blink Weekend magazine of Hindu Business Line, they were coming out with a special issue on fiction debuts of 2016, and they wanted me and other debut authors to write specially commissioned short stories for them. So that story actually got included in this collection as well. It's called Sandalwood, and that was a different experience because it was the first time I'd written a creative piece of fiction to a deadline.
Would you like to read us a short excerpt from Sandalwood?
Yes, I can do that. So this, I'm reading an extract from a short story called Sandalwood. It's about a woman who lives in London with her husband and 2 children. And after 17 years of marriage, her husband tells her that he's just discovered that he's actually homosexual. And he wants her to move out, and he wants his new partner to move in. His new partner is called Chandan. He's a career man in a smart suit. So that's going to work out very well for the new couple. Meanwhile, the 2 teenage children decide that they'd rather stay with their father in their nice house rather than move in with their mother in a new, small, pokey flat. At first, she tries to see the children from a distance by going to where the school bus is going to pick them up every morning. She doesn't dare to approach them. So here's what happens next. I had no job and no experience of working. The tattered half-life I led was one in which minutes seemed like hours, and an hour simply something invented to drive me to insanity. After the bus left, all semblance of routine disintegrated. But for the school bus, I wouldn't have left my bed. For weeks, breakfast before the bus was my only meal. Lunchtime would find me wandering the local park with a carton of orange juice in my hand to stave off thirst. By dinner time, I would be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and sobbing. What I did in the intervening hours, I cannot say. 17 years were gone at the first whiff of sandalwood, the damned whiff of Chandan, who was now filling my husband's life with his odious fragrance. Once on a weekend, I positioned myself near the house to see what they were all up to, this new family. I saw them going off to some lunch party, new friends no doubt, piling happy and eager into the Pajero, carrying a magnificent iced cake made by, who else, Chandan. I never spied on them again. That is, till I discovered that I still had the keys to the house buried in my purse. At mid-morning on a Monday, I let myself into the house. All was silent. I did a sort of inspection tour. There were plump new silk cushions on the sofa, making the place look rather opulent. In the kitchen, Chandan had moved my prized knife set from its place near the hob. It now sparkled in a sunny spot by the window next to a new pot of violets, making it look like something one would see in a magazine. I opened the fridge. Strawberry milk for Pratik, raisin bread for Nidhi, low cholesterol margarine for my husband. All was in order as it should be. Then upstairs to the bedroom. I expected my breath to catch when I went in there, but strangely it didn't. It's not like we'd been active in the bedroom lately. I only cared for my home. I wanted it back, desperately. I want my things to be on my dressing table, I thought, as I stared down at the male colognes and hairbrushes near the gnarled mark on the wood that looked like a stack of pancakes. I want to cook for my children, I thought, staring at the tired face in the mirror. When I left, I had a plan. The next day, and the next, and the next, I escaped my dreary flat and hung out at home. Why not? For at least a few hours a day, I went back to my normal life and activities. I tidied up in the children's rooms upstairs. I did a bit of ironing, taking care not to iron anything that belonged to Chandan. Some dusting, useful things that nobody would notice. I watched television, made myself a light lunch. Chandan appeared to be a good housekeeper, but this house was none of his business. It was mine. Each day, after a short nap on the sofa where I lay with one of our old novels from the bookshelf, I left the house at precisely 3 p.m., and I made sure that I left everything just as I'd found it. But I started wondering what would happen if I made the kids a snack before I left. I missed feeding them. So I made some cheese toasties and put them on the kitchen island where the children always ate, perched on high stools. Then I hid. I went into the store cupboard by the back door and peered out. I had an excellent view of half the kitchen. Right on time, I heard the front door open.
Thank you so much, Tejaswini.
Thank you.
Hemant, I know you're carrying some very special, very early editions of Avida Nandar with you. Would you please read us a poem from one of these early issues, if you can?
Okay, anyway, this is like the magazine.
Wait.
No, I can't. No. Anyways, what I can do is after the
Sure,
session, then we can actually look at the
sure. But if you could read us a
how
poem from.
undecided we were and how we changed one of sizes. And finally, the Hector Spencer size. I
Right.
have not seen your magazine that time.
Right.
But actually, we finalized this size, and we were actually coming out with this size magazine. But we learned, actually, me and my wife actually were coming out with magazines which were like suitable for.
I must say Smriti is a huge part of Paperwall and Poetry Wala, and I don't know, I can't see her in the audience right now, but she is she is almost the second counterpart to Hemant. So,
She is 51% partner, I got it.
right. All right. So if you could read us a poem, and then we shall open up the audience questions.
I think I will read in Marathi. People won't.
That's absolutely okay. We're all right with all forms of Indian languages.
I'm actually going to read two poems. One is actually when we started Avida, people were interested in the kind of poetry I used to write. And at that time, it was like regular poetry. But it is, again, like response to technology. You must have heard of this space station or space satellite called Skylab, where people of my age group, or maybe elder than me, must be knowing the Skylab and how it was and terrible that where it is going to fall or something like that. So that time I was not aware of the technology, and so my response is typically very different. So I'm reading that poem first and maybe the smaller poem later. Skylab पडू नये म्हणून आम्ही वर्गणी काढली व ठरवलं पूजा करायची चेडोबाची. Skylab पडू नये म्हणून आम्ही वर्गणी काढली आणि ठरवलं पूजा करायची चेडोबाची. Skylab पडलं नाही तेव्हा चेडोबाच्या नावाने आम्ही शंकर भोजनाच्या जिलेब्या खाल्ल्या. Skylab पडणार म्हणून वडिलांनी त्यांच्या अख्ख्या पगाराचा आणला खाऊ. Skylab पडलं नाही तेव्हा आम्ही अनेक दिवस मिलोच्या भाकरी खाल्ल्या. मिलो इज like Jawar is Milo, and normally pigs in this America or Africa, they eat that thing, and it was imported that time in India during 1972, but it's later. सायल्या पडणार म्हणून आईने 16 सोमवारांचे व्रत पकडले. सायल्या पडलं नाही तेव्हा आम्ही खाल्लं बोकडाचं मटण सोमवारी. उरलेला रस्सा आईने मंगळवारी स्वस्त केला. सायल्या पडणार म्हणून सगळेच आले एकत्र झोपायचं अंगणात. सायल्या पडल्याच्या दिवशी आम्ही सगळे प्रकाश पाहत आकाशाकडे मरणाची वाट झोपलो थकून. सकाळी स्वतःला जिवंत पाहून चक्रावलो. 7:05च्या बातमीत पडलं होतं सायल्या समुद्रात. 7:10 आम्ही सर्व तुरुंग बुडलो नदीत. येताना बोंबललो सायल्याच्या आईचा भाऊ, सायल्याच्या आईचा.
Thanks, guys.
I actually used to stay in a small village near Mumbai, which is part of Konkan. So you must be knowing that Aisa is like you can say to any of your friends or anyone. So second poem actually, it's like 6-line poem. Change of it's like a change in technology, and that actually changes the life, and that actually changes the poetry. So this is a very small poem, फुलपाखरं. कॉम्प्लेक्सच्या गार्डनमध्ये फिरताना मी सहज मित्राला म्हटलं, अरे गर्द पिवळ्या रंगाची छोटी फुलपाखरं दिसतच नाही हल्ली. तर तो सहजच म्हणाला, तो ब्रँड आता बंद झाला आहे.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Hemant. Arun, I think we can sort of wrap this up with a short kind of bit from you and then from Tejaswini and Hemant as to for new writers stepping into poetry and experimental short story formats, what would be the sort of advice that you would give younger people who are just sort of stepping into the genre? What pitfalls sort of lay in wait for them? And actually, yeah, let's start with Hemant, and then we can move backward.
I can tell to the elder people also and younger people also that play with language. That's it. I mean, you can't really know anything else, and you can't teach how to write.
Writing's
poetry.
all about having fun with language.
Try to tell how to write poetry when you are trying to make some mold or kind of what you call it, like within Marathi, we have Deshi Vadi. So it is about the people with pant and shirt. They have a rural background. They are now
In the city.
class 1 officers and all, and they are still writing poetry about their how the farmers are dying and all that stuff. And actually they are also responsible. Some of them are, I know that they have actually not done anything for their own small village. So I will only say that play with language the way you can. It's like dance like a man or whatever you want to say. It's like that. Play with language. More the play, you will actually write the big thing. Or maybe a good thing. Great is nobody can write great, people will decide later on maybe. But play with words.
And as for you, Tejaswini?
For beginner writers of short stories, I would say to be conscious of the difference between a short story and a story that is short. I think there's quite a big difference. A story that is short can be like a folk tale or a fable or even say a magazine article you might read recounting a personal experience. And for me, a short story, the genre of a short story, should create a before and an after. The characters should have some complexity, some depth, and all that needs to be created within a few pages. Unlike a novel, you don't have the luxury of thousands and thousands of words to do this, and I think that's where the skill
word
lies.
building that comes in a novel, as we were talking about this before, is that the world building in a novel is fairly static, whereas with a short story, you've got to start again and again building that world
Yes.
of the short story.
That's right.
So,
I mean, the storytelling needs to be concise. There can't be, I don't think there can be superfluous words, superfluous sentences. In a novel, you can fairly easily get away with a dud sentence if the novel as a whole is great. You can even get away sometimes with a slip in logic. Not so with a short story. It has to be very precise. The language use has to be very sharp like a knife, I would say. And you could say that I think that if a great novel is like a treasure chest, a great short story is like a perfectly cut jewel. And I think it would be good for, that's what my advice would be to beginner writers, to be aware of that difference.
and Arun, I know you see a lot of beginner writers.
I have 3 things to say about this. Firstly, I think that people just starting out writing or people who want to publish their own stories should firstly read a lot more. Like keep reading different kinds of writing. And really, read as in take your time with reading it. When you start writing, take your time with writing. I've spoken to a lot of creative people who follow a process where when they write something, like they go all out, but then once they are done or they feel like they're 95% done, they'll leave it alone, they'll work on something else, they'll give it 2-3 weeks and come back to it and then look at it again. If it still doesn't make them cringe, or if it makes them cringe and then they feel like they need to change something or maybe something is not working, like that distance sort of gives you that perspective to decide something. I think a lot of newer writers, after their first or second draft, they're just happy with it, they don't want to work on it anymore. So I think taking the time is important. And thirdly, not to take feedback personally. From people that you look up to is fine, but a lot of people will say a lot of things about your writing, but you have to decide what works for you.
When it comes to poetry, do you see more or less experimental poetry when it comes to Helter Skelter?
There is a lot of experimental poetry. Some of it doesn't always work, but I like the idea that people are trying out these experimental forms of poetry, and if they keep doing it enough and they keep putting more time into it, I think they will get it right.
All right. So I think, do we have time for questions?
So my name is Anand. I already asked a question previously, so if nobody has a question, I do have one. When do each of you know that this is it? You drafted, redrafted, added something, deleted something. When do you know this is it? I don't want to do anything more about it. The poetry, the short story, the publishing efforts, you decide to leave something in, take something out, put something in. How do you know this is it? I'm happy now. No matter what, it gets me a ₹1 or $10, this is it.
I think Hemant will take that.
Yeah, good question actually. Even when I'm reading all these poems and I was now looking for books in Marathi, but I actually don't know whether I have completed the poems properly or no. Actually, I think that if I try to write now, whatever I'm writing is pretty open-ended because now the life is like that. We can't actually close everything all the time. So mostly there are a lot of scopes, there is a scope in every poem to go further. But still you know that now you have to leave it there. And that's kind of like you don't have capacity to work on it more. So I do that with others. So mostly sometimes actually I feel that this poem is complete, but still I can still work later on, maybe after 10 years. I actually was thinking that I should change everything now, but I kept it because then other people will say now you have changed everything, so we'll have to change a lot of things that way. So I think nothing is complete, and in my case at least, so it goes on.
We're always unsatisfied with our art.
So for me, the point at which I think a short story is complete is when I just have to feel it in my bones that this is the best it can be. And I don't reach that conclusion very easily. My process of editing is long and torturous, and there are several incubation periods where I think it's complete, I put it away, I come back to it, I think this is terrible, or I think this is great, and then I work on it accordingly. Again, I put it away, and again, I come back to it. So the period of incubation is very, very important for me. And the other thing, of course, is to read very, very widely in order to be, and to read people you admire, in order to set some kind of standard to aim for. I think the more you're exposed to the best writers of that genre, that establishes a certain standard which you can aspire to without copying or anything, but it's a standard.
Actually, that's a very interesting thing. Would you like to share who are the writers that you look up to, or that, at the start of your careers, you were sort of aiming at reaching that point?
I would say poets.
Poets.
I actually, maybe a lot of people know that my favorite poets are Arun Kovankar, Dilip Chitray, Dr. Prasad, part of Pablo Neruda, anti-poetry movement and all that. So many Latin American poets. I also like poetry of many unknown Marathi poets like Vasant Gurjar and Dattatreya Gurjar. And I also like poems of Vinod Kumar Shukla in Hindi. Many poets actually. Now in English today, I write poetry of Sapuna Chatterjee. I mean, not everything, but some poems of Sapuna, some poems of Ranjit, and then some poems of one poem, very good poem of Arun Sagar. And so on. I mean, I don't like myself completely, so I have to pick and choose whichever poem I like. I completely can't say that I also like even Arun Kovankar or Dilip Chitray, all 1,000 pages. Maybe I like around
A few poems.
few poems, maybe around 100 pages or so. But that's huge. If somebody likes 10 poems of mine, I would be like, oh, great.
And Tejaswini, what about you?
So my absolute hero in the short story genre is Roald Dahl for his adult short stories. And
yes.
I was inspired first of all to start writing because of him. And I absolutely love his twists in the tale. I love the way he uses the language. He seems to cut to the dark heart of a character within a few well-chosen words. That's something I always aspired to. And the other one who I really admire is the short fiction of Doris Lessing. And very similarly, she uses language with a very fine precision. Nothing superfluous there, and delineates her characters and her situations with razor-sharp precision.
Were there shades of Kafka in The Beetle?
I'm sorry?
Were there shades of Kafka in The Beetle?
In the Beatles story. So we're talking about the first story in my collection. It's called Homo coleoptera. It's about a beetle collector who is jealous of his wife. He thinks she's having an affair with his cousin. And he fantasizes about shrinking her to the size of a beetle. So that's the question, whether there were echoes of Kafka in that. Actually, for that particular story, no, because I wrote that and must confess quite a bit later came to Kafka. So, in fact, having read that story, somebody recommended to me, oh, you should read Kafka. And then
Oh, no.
Yeah, so it...
All right.
Hi, my name is Somyajit. In fact, this is the first time I'm asking a question in any conference. I would like to ask you both, Arun and Hemant, how has been the reception? I mean, you guys have been in the industry probably for at least for 5 to 10 years, or if not more. How has the reception to short story genre or the poetry genre changed through? I mean, very honestly, it sounds very nice, and a lot of us probably really love. I mean, most people who are staying here right now probably love poetry and short story, but it's also a business, and you have probably been through the ups and downs, and this is a different generation, this is a different time. So how has been the reception, and so what's your outlook on that?
I think they don't just have 5 to 10 years, they have over 35 years now between both of you all.
Yeah.
Poetry actually there are actually good readers of poetry. And I think I'm quite satisfied with whatever other poets are writing also. I mean, not every poem of theirs can be great, but I mean, it's like a community now in Mumbai. You know, poetry written in maybe English and then other languages. We're all together. I mean, that's how you are asking me, right? So it's like now we have a small gang here, and we can actually call each other and meet and a lot of things actually it's a family-like situation. So only one thing is lacking, that we are still not going beyond. I like your poem and I do like my poem. We have to actually go beyond that. There should be criticism, you know, instead of only some lines of praise or whatever. Feedback. There should be criticism, more criticism of poets. I think Marathi have a group, but we are all scattered. But we criticize each other's work, and we are still friends. I mean, we criticize each other to actually, we get benefited later.
Again, I get asked this question a lot, like why do you publish short fiction, why do you publish poetry? I mean, like with me, it took me 2 years after the magazine started to even consider putting it out. Like I thought about it for 2 years, and at some point I was just like, you know, I'll never know whether people will read this or not unless I actually do it and see if people are reading it. So like I said, we actually put out 3 volumes online first to just sort of gauge the response. Are people reading it? People were reading it, people were submitting stories for it, people were emailing us about the stories with their feedback. So that's how we kind of gauge. So that's when I also thought, okay, now is the time to, maybe if we put out a print book, people may buy it because now there's a readership. And the print book, we did a smaller run for the first one just to see again if people will buy it or not. Because print, as Hemant very well knows, like it's a very expensive exercise. And the first book that we put out in print was like a full color with artwork and all of that, and yeah, very nice paper, very well produced. We didn't make much profit from it, but for us it was an exercise to see how it does. And with the small run we did, like people bought it from all across the country, like random corners where I never even would have guessed that people read Helter Skelter, but like books have gone there. And based on that we sold out, and this time we've done a much larger run, and we keep selling copies every week, like it's steadily. It's maybe like, I won't say flying off the shelves, but steady sales are happening, so it's pretty encouraging that way.
So I think with that we will wrap this up. Thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you for giving us your time. And thank you very much to the Kalagura team and to Ranjit and to Khurshid and Hina. Thank you all.